What's up, Packers Nation? Happy Friday. Welcome to the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube. I'm your host, Andy Herman. Today, I'm going to be going over a topic that I think is somewhat important. And I could probably start off today by going over the details of the Kevin King contract and what that means for the Packers, but I think everyone's probably just a little bit Kevin King'd out this week so far. So let's talk about something different. Let's talk about the 2017 NFL Draft, which of course centers around Kevin King. So I apologize in advance, but this is something that I like to do this time of year is actually look back 4 seasons ago at the draft, again, 4 seasons ago, and how Green Bay did. And I know kind of the old adage is that you need 3 seasons to evaluate a draft and whether or not it turned out or not. But I really like that 4-season mark because for the most part, everyone besides first round picks have gotten through their first contracts. And even the first round picks, they've had to make decisions on their 5th-year option and things like that so far. So we really have a good understanding of not only how are these players playing, but how did the teams feel about them? Did they extend them? Did they, did they bring them back? Are they on a second contract? Are they still in the league? Did those first round picks get their second or their 5th-year option picked up? So I think these are all really, really interesting things to take a look at this 4-year mark. And now at this point in time, with the Kevin King news and the Aaron Jones news and the Jamal Williams news, we know basically at this point in time where that 2017 draft class stands for the Packers. And what I'm going to be doing here at each pick is looking at what options were there, and then what other, players at that same position were available. So it's a little bit of a deeper dive. They had quite a few picks, so I'm going to run through this pretty quick. My plan is to have this, an article on this up on Packer Report in the coming days. But let's start off with, of course, their first pick in this draft, pick 33, Kevin King. The next 5 picks in that draft that were available, or the next 5 players that were selected, were offensive tackle Cam Robinson, Malik McDowell, the defensive tackle that basically was out of the league almost immediately, Budda Baker for the Cardinals, Zay Jones, who's also basically, I think he's out of the league or has had a really, awkward, route through the league so far. And then offensive lineman Forrest Lamp. So not the greatest next 5 picks. I mean, Budda Baker's definitely been really, really good for the Cardinals. Cam Robinson just got franchised. I'm not exactly sure why. He's been a below average left tackle in the NFL the last few seasons. McDowell and Jones basically flamed out. Forrest Lamp hasn't done a ton. So I think, overall, when you just look at those next 5 picks, I mean, Kevin King doesn't look as bad in retrospect. However, you look at, what they could have done, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but the next 5 corners selected. So let's say Green Bay was dead set on going cornerback here. Let's take a look at the next 5 corners that were selected. There was Sidney Jones, Quincy Wilson, Teez Tabor, remember that name, Chidobe Awuzie, and Ahkello Witherspoon. And to be fair to Green Bay, none of those 5 really turned out. Sidney Jones had a little bit of a reconnaissance this past year, moving to Jacksonville. Quincy Wilson never turned out. Teez Tabor was a complete flameout. Chidobe Awuzie had, some up and down seasons in Dallas, just signed a contract, and then Ahkello Witherspoon just signed a smaller Kevin King type deal, really, with the Seattle Seahawks coming from San Francisco. So it's not like you look at those next 5 corners selected and are like, all right, well, Green Bay really missed out. I'm not sure if you guys know this or not. I think I might be the first one to have uncovered this. Green Bay traded back in the first round into the second round, and guess which players were available? I'm being obviously very facetious. You know already very well that both TJ Watt and Ryan Ramczyk were available had they not traded back. And of course, that is what this draft will ultimately be remembered for. Green Bay is passing on TJ Watt, passing on Ryan Ramczyk, trading down, and then selecting Kevin King. And remember, going into day 2 of the draft, because they had the first selection on day 2, the rumors going into that day is that Green Bay was deciding between 3 players: Kevin King, Dalvin Cook, and DeShone Kizer. And I tend to think this is probably correct. They end up passing on Dalvin Cook, which a running back at that point is rich, but Dalvin Cook's obviously been amazing. Interestingly enough, they probably, who knows if they actually select Aaron Jones later in the draft. That would be a really interesting dynamic to throw in there. But of course, DeShone Kizer, they thought highly of. They get him later. That ends up being a nightmare. And then, Kevin King has turned out to be pretty math for the most part, and passing on TJ Watt, Ryan Ramczyk to pick up a 4th round pick, which we'll talk about later, ends up being Vince Beagle. Not obviously turning out the best way and the best ultimate use of resources. Now, hindsight certainly at the forefront here, but what's frustrating about this is TJ Watt sitting there. And you might say, well, maybe that's not Green Bay's type. 7, 8 years earlier, the Packers traded up in the first round for an outside linebacker in Clay Matthews. And they're not 1,000,000% the correct, analogy, but they are damn close. Like, Clay Matthews was a bit undersized, just peaked at the end of his college career, constant effort, heart hustle, and you could see the bloodlines and you could see that he was starting to peak at the right time and grow into his body and he was going to be an athletic freak. Didn't have the full body of work, but you could see it starting to come around towards the end of his college career. Green Bay trades up, takes a gamble, and it pays off huge. TJ Watt's the exact same story. Has the bloodlines, athletic freak, took a little bit of while to get to that point towards the end of his time in Madison, but you could see all the traits and everything was there. To me, it was one of the more easy evaluations that was out there this year. Very, very similar to Clay Matthews. They trade up for Clay Matthews. They trade out of that pick to get down and eventually select Kevin King. So that is going to be what ultimately this draft is remembered for. Ultimately, that pick, I'm going to give a C-, D+. They pass on Ramczyk and Watt. They end up with a corner who was probably the best corner that was going to be selected in that range. Plays for 4 seasons. His most memorable moment, probably the NFC Championship game for not the right reasons, and just re-signed with Green Bay to start a 1-year deal on his second contract. So we'll see what happens in the remainder of his career. Next up, selection 61, Josh Jones. Next picks in the draft, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deion Dawkins, who's had a great career at offensive line. Taylor Moton's had a nice career for the Panthers. Larry Ogunjobi started good, didn't play well the last couple of years. And then Ahkello Witherspoon, again, corner that was for San Francisco, just recently signed with Seattle. But let's take a look at the next 5 safeties that were selected. John Johnson had a great career for the Rams, now just signed a big contract with the Browns. Lano Hill did nothing. Tedrick Thompson did nothing. Eddie Jackson for the Chicago Bears, and then Rayshawn Jenkins, who just got a new deal as well. So Josh Jones, first of all, the next 5 picks, nowhere near Juju Smith-Schuster, Deion Dawkins, Taylor Moton, Larry Ogunjobi, and a couple picks after that was Alvin Kamara as well. So Green Bay missed out on some opportunities there and didn't even get the best safety on the board by far. Josh Johnson and Eddie Jackson both were on the board at safety at that point. So a huge failure here for Green Bay, not getting the value, having way better players that ended up, in the next 5 to 10 picks, and then having 2 safeties that completely outplayed Josh Jones within the next 40 to 50 picks. So really big fail here for Green Bay. Jones ends up out of Green Bay. They release him, signs with Jacksonville, has basically an awful year there last year. And my guess is he probably won't be in the league that much longer. Number 3 pick, Montrevius Adams, pick number 93. Next 5 picks, Cam Sutton, Lano Hill, Kenny Galladay, Cordrea Tankersley, and then Chad Williams, the wide receiver. The next 5 defensive tackles selected, Nazir Jones, Jaleel Johnson, Ryan Glasgow, Carlos Watkins, and Grover Stewart. So Kenny Galladay on the board, missed out on that. And then Grover Stewart's defensive tackle would have been a much better pick ultimately with, again, benefit of hindsight. And again, this is benefit of hindsight, and we can go in every single draft here in every single year for every single team, and there's going to be players on the board in hindsight that you wish you would have had. So I'm not just gifting this as the benefit of hindsight and saying, look at these players. Every team could do that with almost every single pick. But you're going to start to see a trend here where on almost every pick, there's either a better player or a better player at the same position for the majority of this draft. And when you have 3 picks in the top 100 that end up in Kevin King, Josh Jones, Montrevius Adams, when there were much better opportunities, obviously not a great start to this draft for Green Bay. Next up is Vince Beagle, who they were able to select because they got that 4th round pick in the trade, moving down to get Kevin King and picking up the 4th round pick. Next 5 picks, Jaleel Johnson, Dede Westbrook, Tedrick Thompson, Eddie Jackson, and Rayshawn Jenkins. So again, opportunity, even if you miss on, even if you miss on TJ Watt and Ryan Ramczyk, you picked up this 4th round pick. There's an Eddie Jackson laying out there for you. Doesn't unfortunately go that way. The next 5 edge defenders, Carl Lawson, who just got a huge deal, Samson Ebukam, who just got a new deal, Deatrick Wise just got a new deal, Avery Moss, and El Quadin Muhammad. Now, to be fair, Carl Lawson and Deatrick Wise didn't really fit perfectly within Green Bay's system. Samson Ebukam would have been a better pick with Beagle. Not a massive issue here. I mean, this still isn't a good grade for Green Bay because there were better talent on the board. The bigger issue is that they probably let Beagle go a little bit too early. Ended up having a couple nice seasons with New Orleans and Miami. But this is just another failed pick for Green Bay that didn't turn out, and they didn't get basically any return on investment for. Next up, little bit better here. Pick 134, Jamal Williams. Next 5 picks on the board, Josh Dobbs, Sean Harlow, Zach Banner, Ryan Glasgow, and Jehu Chesson. So Williams easily the best of that group. Next 5 running backs selected, Wayne Gallman, Marlon Mack, Brian Hill, Jeremy McNichols, and TJ Logan. So you can make a strong argument that they probably would have been better to go with with Marlon Mack. But I think he's been really injured and banged up throughout his career. I don't think you have a massive disadvantage going with Jamal Williams here. Williams has been a better blocker, better pass catcher, probably better all around back, whereas Mack's been the pure better runner. But certainly a nice pick here for Green Bay. He just goes to Detroit, so you don't get a second contract out of him. Just a little bit of a bummer, when you're looking at draft value overall, but overall a solid pick there for Green Bay. Next up, Angelo Yancey. Next 5 picks, J.J. Dielman, Trent Taylor, Devon Godchaux, T.J. Logan, and Danny Isadora. Next 5 wide receivers selected, Trent Taylor, Robert Davis, Stacey Coley, David Moore, and Isaiah Ford. And now you start getting to the point in the draft where you're just throwing darts at a dartboard. And even if you have somebody that fails, you're not going to hold it too much against them. As I mentioned, is there anyone on that list I just named? Like Devon Godchaux's had an okay career. Trent Taylor probably definitely had a better wide receiver career than Angelo Yancey, but it's still just a cup of coffee and nothing major. So you're not going to burn Green Bay for missing on anything too big here. They took a shot at a receiver who was athletic and had good ball skills, and it just didn't turn out. Pick 182. Aaron Jones, their one, grade A pick in this draft. The next 5 picks, Ukemi Ligwe, Nathan Jerry, Caleb Brantley, Chuck Clark, and Mike Tyson, if you remember that. No major issues there. And then the next 5 running backs, Elijah McGuire, D'Angelo Henderson, Devonte Mays, and Khalfani Muhammad. And then Elijah Hood was the next one after that. So so not anything too crazy that would have been there. And certainly Aaron Jones was by far and away the best pick at that time and a home run pick for Green Bay, especially for what they've been able to get out of him. Just signed him, of course, to that second contract. So great value there for pick 182 overall in Aaron Jones. Next up, Kofi Amichia, pick 212. The next 5 picks, long snapper Colin Holba, Elijah Qualls, the defensive tackle, quarterback Brad Kaya, cornerback Marquez White, and offensive lineman Corey Levin. I don't think any of those 5 did anything. Maybe Colin Holba is a long snapper sticking around somewhere. I don't have my long snapper depth chart out with me, unfortunately, but there were only 4 more offensive linemen selected: Corey Levin, Jalen Ware, Brad Seaton, and Kyle Fuller. Kyle Fuller, I just talked about yesterday. Fuller would have probably been the better pick here. He's still in the league. But outside of that, again, these are shots in the dark and nothing that Green Bay is going to regret too much here. Next up, Devonte Mays. Next 5 picks, Noah Brown, Marquez Williams, Khalfani Muhammad, Elijah Hood, and Kyle Fuller again. And the next 4 running backs, there were only 4 left: Khalfani Muhammad, Elijah Hood, Chris Carson, and Matt Days. So this is definitely one of those. In hindsight, you would love to have Chris Carson instead of Devonte Mays. But again, you're picking this late. Carson went pick 252. He was not a highly thought of prospect at that point. That's definitely one of those. In the benefit of hindsight, you would love to pick Chris Carson, but so would just about everyone else through the rounds 4 through 7 of that draft. So not going to hold anything too much against Green Bay there. And then last but not least, their last selection, Malachi Dupre. The next 5 picks, Keon Adams, Chris Carson, Pat O'Connor, Mason Schreck, and Matthew Days. There were no more wide receivers selected in the draft after Malachi Dupre, but definitely were some strong undrafted free agent receivers. Tim Patrick, Keelan Cole, Greg Ward, Kendrick Bourne, and Zach Pascal. So a few of those just got pretty nice contracts recently. So definitely missed out on a couple of those, but so did every other team. Overall, really rough draft for Green Bay, right? You definitely get Aaron Jones, and you get a couple nice seasons out of Jamal Williams and Kevin King, I guess, but a huge missed opportunity with Kevin King, Josh Jones, and Montrevius Adams being 2 complete busts at pick 61 and 93 with no second deals. I don't think Vince Beagle made it through the second year. I don't know if he made it through the first year, but definitely didn't make it through the second year of his contract. Jamal Williams, a nice piece, but at pick 134, you get, a couple nice seasons out of him, and he's gone. Solid pick, but nothing great. Yancey was a bust. Aaron Jones, great pick. Kofi Amichia, Devonte Mays, and Malachi Dupre, nothing special. Didn't hang around the league at all. So missed opportunity, I would say, would be the best way to put this for Green Bay. Everyone for the last 4 years has not stopped talking about TJ Watt, and mostly TJ Watt, but certainly Ryan Ramczyk as well. there's nothing more to say about it at this point, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. I did the same thing last year via Packer Report for the 2016 draft. So this is not me cherry picking Kevin King news. This is not me cherry picking and wanting to rehash out the TJ Watt topic, because everyone knows that topic's been beaten well over the head. And in fact, I wrote an article once for Cheesehead TV just saying it's time to put that article or that topic to rest forever. So I'm not trying to do that here, but I do really think it's fun to take a look back at these drafts 4 years after the fact, see what Green Bay hit on, see what they missed on, what opportunities were there, how they evaluated players. And this is definitely one that they would like to have back. And a big reason why, Kevin King, if he hits, all the questions about that number 2 corner and what Green Bay's going to do, certainly not as big. If they get an edge rusher like Vince Beagle, that turns out, maybe you don't have to spend a ton of money on a Preston Smith or a Zadarius Smith. If Josh Jones turns out at safety, maybe you don't have to haul out a ton of money for Adrian Amos, right? Montrevius Adams turns out at defensive tackle. You finally got a tag team partner with Kenny Clark. But just none of these things did. And yeah, you got a couple nice running backs and a corner that played for 4 years, but definitely a draft that Green Bay would love to have back. That's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. I'll be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.